Your legs are burning. You have already marched more than 30 kilometers today. A wooden shield weighing around 10 kilograms presses into your shoulder. Your armor traps the heat. Dust fills your mouth. By sunset, you will still have to build a fortified camp before you can sleep. Tomorrow, you will do it all again. The strange part is that your greatest weapon is not the sword hanging at your side. It is what you ate before sunrise. For centuries, the Roman legion was the most feared military machine in the Mediterranean. At its height, under Emperor Trajan in AD 117, Rome controlled nearly 5 million square kilometers of territory stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia. Most people imagine Roman soldiers surviving on endless meat and wine. That image is almost completely wrong. The food that carried Rome across 3 continents looked surprisingly ordinary. It was built around grain, barley, wheat, beans, olive oil, and a discipline that modern nutrition is only beginning to understand. Once you see what really fueled a Roman legion, you begin to see food less as comfort and more as military technology. In 58 BC, the Roman general Julius Caesar began the Gallic Wars, a campaign that would last nearly a decade. His armies often marched over 25 kilometers a day while carrying equipment weighing between 30 and 45 kilograms. Ancient historians, such as Plutarch and Vegetius, describe soldiers transporting not only weapons but also tools for digging, cooking, and constructing camps. Every evening, they built defensive fortifications from scratch. This was not optional. It was routine. The question was simple. How do you feed tens of thousands of men who are constantly moving? The answer was even simpler. You give every soldier food that can survive almost any journey. Grain became the foundation of the Roman military. Each legionary received regular grain rations that he ground into flour himself using portable hand mills. Instead of depending on bakers, soldiers became their own. Some made coarse bread. Others cooked thick porridge, known as pulse, a simple mixture of grain and water that had fed Italians long before Rome became an empire. It was filling, portable, difficult to spoil, and remarkably efficient. According to the Roman military writer Vegetius, maintaining reliable food supplies mattered just as much as maintaining sharp weapons. An army without food rarely lost battles. It simply stopped moving. Archaeology tells the same story. Excavations at Roman forts across Britain, including sites along Hadrian's Wall, have uncovered enormous granaries engineered with raised floors that allowed air to circulate underneath stored grain. Keeping grain dry was as important as winning the next battle. Rotting food could destroy an army long before the enemy appeared. The Romans understood logistics with an obsession that bordered on mathematics. One missing shipment could threaten an entire campaign. One successful harvest could extend an empire. Food was planned months ahead. Roads were designed not only for marching soldiers, but also for wagons carrying grain from distant provinces. The famous Roman roads connected farms as much as they connected cities. Every kilometer of stone carried calories. By the 2nd century AD, Rome had developed one of the largest supply networks the ancient world had ever seen. Ships crossed the Mediterranean carrying Egyptian wheat toward Italy. River barges supplied frontier forts. Warehouses stood beside military roads, like the arteries of a living organism. A legion marched because its stomach marched first. Modern researchers often compare military logistics to blood circulation. Without continuous movement of supplies, the entire body collapses. The Romans understood this nearly 2,000 years before modern supply chain theory existed. But grain alone was never enough. Marching all day burns enormous amounts of energy. The body also loses salt through sweat. Muscles require protein to repair microscopic damage after constant walking, digging, and fighting. Roman soldiers solved this problem with foods that looked humble but delivered remarkable nutritional value. Beans, lentils, chickpeas, broad beans. Excavations at military sites, such as Vindolanda, just south of Hadrian's Wall, have uncovered preserved seeds and food remains showing that legumes were common components of military diets. Together with grain, they formed complete proteins capable of supporting heavy physical labor. Long before scientists identified amino acids, Roman cooks were accidentally combining foods that complemented one another almost perfectly. The combination appears again and again throughout history. Rice and beans, corn and beans, bread and lentils, different civilizations, the same biological solution. Roman soldiers also carried cheese. Hard cheeses survived long journeys better than fresh milk, which spoiled quickly without refrigeration. Cheese concentrated calories, fat, calcium, sodium, and protein into something small enough to fit inside a pack. Olive oil played another critical role. It was not merely a cooking ingredient. It was one of the empire's most valuable sources of dietary fat. Fat contains more than twice the calories per gram compared with carbohydrates or protein. For men marching hundreds of kilometers over weeks, every drop mattered. Olive oil also preserved food, improved flavor, and supplied nutrients that dry grain alone could not. Then there was salt. Today, it sits unnoticed on kitchen tables. In ancient Rome, it was strategic. The famous Roman road, known as the Via Salaria, or Salt Road, existed largely because transporting salt was essential to both civilian life and military survival. Was salt preserved meat? Salt replaced minerals lost through sweat. Salt made long-distance campaigns possible. Even the English word salary traces its roots to the Latin word salarium, reflecting salt's extraordinary economic importance. By itself, none of these foods seem extraordinary. Bread, beans, oil, cheese, salt, they sound more like the contents of a village pantry than the fuel of history's greatest military machine. But that is exactly the point. Rome did not build an empire on rare foods. It built one on foods that could be produced consistently, transported efficiently, and eaten almost anywhere. The real secret was never luxury. It was reliability. Except there was one food almost everyone gets wrong when they imagine Roman soldiers, and that misunderstanding changes the entire picture. The popular image is impossible to miss. A Roman soldier tears into a massive piece of roasted meat after battle. It appears in films, paintings, even history books. But archaeology tells a more complicated story. In 2006, archaeologists studying the Roman fortress at Vindolanda uncovered thousands of animal bones left behind by generations of soldiers. There were cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens, even wild game. The discovery proved that Roman soldiers certainly ate meat, but it also revealed something equally important. Meat was not the center of every meal. It was one part of a much larger system. Fresh meat was difficult to transport. Animals required food and water while traveling. Slaughtering them too early meant spoilage. Without refrigeration, an army could not depend on steaks the way modern people imagine. Instead, meat was often eaten when circumstances allowed, after successful hunts, near established forts, during supply deliveries, or after livestock reached military camps alive. When fresh meat was unavailable, preserved foods took over. Salted pork, smoked bacon, dried sausage. These could survive weeks or even months if stored properly. The Romans understood preservation because they had no alternative. Every campaign became a race against decay. Fish solved another problem. Across the Mediterranean, salted fish traveled enormous distances inside sealed containers. One product became so valuable that it appeared almost everywhere the empire reached. It was called garum. Garum was made by fermenting fish with large quantities of salt. By modern standards, the process sounds unpleasant. To the Romans, it was indispensable. Factories in Baetica, in modern-day southern Spain, produced enormous quantities that were shipped across the empire. Archaeologists have discovered amphorae, once filled with garum, from Britain to North Africa. It flavored grain, seasoned vegetables, improved preserved meat, and added minerals that soldiers constantly lost through sweating. In many ways, garum functioned like a universal seasoning, not unlike soy sauce in East Asia or fish sauce in Southeast Asia today. One ingredient, thousands of meals. Another surprise waited inside Roman camps: fruit. Excavations at military sites have uncovered remains of apples, figs, grapes, walnuts, hazelnuts, and dried fruits. These foods supplied natural sugars, fiber, and vitamins without requiring complicated preparation. Dried figs, in particular, packed remarkable amounts of energy into very little weight, perfect for long marches. Nuts served a similar purpose. Rich in fat and protein, they stored well and required no cooking. Modern hikers still rely on exactly the same nutritional strategy. Portable food has changed less than you might think. Then there was vinegar. Roman soldiers frequently drank a diluted mixture called posca. It combined water with sour wine or vinegar. To modern ears, that sounds unpleasant, but in the ancient world, it made perfect sense. Clean drinking water was never guaranteed. Adding vinegar helped slow bacterial growth while improving the taste of stale water carried over long distances. The drink also encouraged soldiers to stay hydrated during exhausting marches through hot climates. Hydration was a military advantage advantage long before anyone understood electrolytes. The Roman physician Galen, writing in the 2nd century AD, repeatedly emphasized the importance of balancing food, drink, and physical activity. Although ancient medicine differed greatly from modern science, Galen recognized that strength depended on consistent nourishment rather than occasional feasts. That idea appears repeatedly across Roman military life. Consistency defeated excess. Discipline defeated abundance. Food itself became another form of training. Roman soldiers were expected to prepare much of their own meals. Grinding grain by hand demanded effort. Cooking required planning. Firewood had to be collected. Utensils carried. Time managed. Even eating reinforced discipline. Every routine strengthened habits that extended far beyond the battlefield. Modern military historians often describe Roman legions as engineering units that also fought wars. They built roads, bridges, walls, forts, aqueducts. Food supported every one of those achievements. Calories became architecture. Nutrition became infrastructure. You can still see the evidence today. At Vindolanda, archaeologists discovered wooden writing tablets preserved beneath oxygen-poor soil. One tablet records requests for supplies sent between Roman officers. Others mention food deliveries, livestock, and provisions. These are not dramatic stories of heroic battles. They are shopping lists, inventories, administrative notes, and that is precisely what makes them extraordinary. Empires are remembered through victories, but they survive through accounting. Every sack of wheat, every barrel of oil, every shipment of salt, someone counted it, someone transported it, someone made sure it arrived before hunger did. The Roman army understood a truth that modern biology continues to confirm. The human body performs best when it receives steady fuel rather than unpredictable extremes. Large feasts, followed by long starvation, force the body into survival mode. Regular meals create stability. Roman soldiers rarely ate like kings. They ate like professionals. But there was another force shaping their strength that had almost nothing to do with food itself. And without it, even the perfect diet would have failed. In AD 77, the Roman writer Pliny the Elder described soldiers as men whose bodies were shaped as much by labor as by war. That distinction mattered, because a Roman legionary did not simply fight. He carried, he climbed, he dug, he built, every single day. Modern military studies estimate that a fully equipped Roman soldier often carried between 30 and 45 kilograms of equipment. That included armor, weapons, tools, cooking gear, personal supplies, and several days of food. The Romans even had a nickname for these men, Marius's mules. The term dates back to the military reforms of Gaius Marius around 17 BC, when soldiers became responsible for carrying much of their own equipment instead of relying heavily on baggage trains. The nickname was meant as a joke. It became a symbol of endurance. Every march placed enormous stress on the body. Leg muscles absorbed thousands of impacts. The back supported constant weight. Hands developed calluses from shields, shovels, and grinding grain. No diet alone could create that kind of resilience. It was forged through repetition. Food simply made repetition possible. Modern exercise science describes a similar principle. The body adapts only when stress is applied consistently and recovery is sufficient. Remove either one, and performance begins to collapse. The Romans never spoke about muscle protein synthesis or glycogen stores, but their routines reflected those realities with remarkable accuracy. March, eat, build, sleep, repeat. For years, training itself was relentless. The Roman historian Vegetius wrote that recruits marched long distances, practiced with wooden weapons nearly twice the weight of real ones, swam rivers, and constructed camps under strict supervision. Heavy practice made real combat feel lighter. Hard routines made emergencies feel familiar. Even food reinforced that philosophy. Simple meals reduced dependence on luxury. A soldier who expected little could campaign almost anywhere. A soldier who demanded comfort became difficult to supply. That flexibility became one of Rome's greatest advantages. Its armies could operate across deserts, mountains, forests, and coastlines because their expectations expectations remained remarkably consistent. Yet, even Rome's system had limits. In AD 9, 3 Roman legions marched into the dense forests of Teutoburg in Germania. Led by Publius Quinctilius Varus, nearly 20,000 soldiers disappeared into unfamiliar terrain. Germanic tribes under Arminius ambushed them over several days. The defeat shocked the empire. Weapons mattered, leadership mattered, but logistics mattered too. Long supply lines became vulnerable. Food became harder to move through forests than across Roman roads. The machine that functioned so efficiently under predictable conditions struggled when its lifelines were cut. The lesson echoed throughout Roman history. An army marched only as far as its food could follow. Centuries later, military strategists would repeat almost the same idea. In the 19th century, the French commander Napoleon Bonaparte famously observed that an army marches on its stomach. The phrase became famous. The Romans had already lived by it for hundreds of years. Today, sports nutrition emphasizes balanced carbohydrates for endurance, protein for recovery, healthy fats for sustained energy, hydration, and consistent meal timing. Strip away the packaging, ignore the marketing. The pattern begins to look strangely familiar. Whole grains, legumes, olive oil, cheese, fruit, nuts, moderate amounts of meat, regular movement, steady routines. The Roman legion never counted calories. It never measured macronutrients. It never used the language of modern nutrition. Yet through centuries of trial, failure, and adaptation, it arrived at a system that matched the demands of the human body with surprising precision. Of course, Roman soldiers were not superhuman. Skeletal remains reveal healed fractures, worn joints, damaged teeth, and signs of disease. Campaigns brought hunger, cold, infection, exhaustion. Many died young. Their diet was not perfect. Their lives were certainly not comfortable. But perfection was never the objective. Reliability was. Rome built one of history's longest-lasting military powers, not by discovering miraculous foods, but by mastering ordinary ones. That may be the most unexpected part of the story. When you imagine the Roman Empire, you probably picture marble temples, triumphal parades, and glittering armor. You rarely picture a soldier kneeling beside a hand mill before dawn, grinding wheat into flour for another bowl of porridge. Yet that quiet moment may have mattered more than the sword he carried. Empires are often remembered through their battles, but they are sustained by habits repeated so often that history forgets to notice them. The Roman legion conquered kingdoms with discipline, and every morning that discipline began with breakfast.